We can start.
Okay, we can start now, na, Aditi? Yeah. Okay. So, welcome everyone to the series of C Conversations. My name is Prasad Shetty, and I work at the School of Environment and Architecture. I hope things are becoming slightly better to all of us as we struggle through these times. Actually, uh, the last series of C Conversations invited scholars from all over South Asia, from Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, speaking about architecture from those their countries. In this series, we look at the question of language in architecture. This question is particularly important for architects because architects are in the business of imagining new space and form, and they do it using language. We at C believe that the structure of language shapes the imagination of space and form. For example, the orthographic projection, which is most commonly used by architects, which is basically a Cartesian system of straight lines and right angles, shape the kind of built form we imagine and make. And this is why we see buildings around us that are so similar in form. And not only that, this space and form also shapes the kind of life people live in them. The C Press publication called The First Question, which was released earlier this year, has a detailed discussion if anyone is interested. First Questions is available online on Amazon. So this series of conversations brings together different kinds of interrogations, practices, and experiments in language. Today we have someone who works with narratives and anecdotes to construct a life that has been so inspiring, the life of Barrister Nath. Why should C, as an architecture school, be launching a book on Nath? Well, for people who know us, our ideological orientations are very close to that of Barrister Pai, and his thoughts and life has been an inspiration to all of us. And C is more than a school of architecture. It is an institution that actively involved with the socioeconomic dimensions of society, and it does it by articulating new possibilities. It's reflective as well as projective. This book on Barrister Pai constructs a slice of history when the nation was being built, the considerations and discussions that shaped our identities and existence today. And Nath Pai's voice was one of the most articulate in those considerations and discussions. Nath Pai traverses through different contexts, the contexts that are instrumental even today, the local, the national, the international. For him, Kokon, Delhi, Mumbai, and Europe, and is able to provide a sensibility that is regional but not parochial, and which is based in the most precious ideas of the 20th century, that of freedom, justice, and equality, the key elements of socialist thought. So while he identifies himself as an inhabitant of Kokon, he's also a staunch Indian, but at the same time, he's also a citizen of the world and humanity. He's able to span across these many scales of identities. For C, while the book and the event is about Nath Pai, it's also about Aditi Pai, the author, who does many things. Painstakingly collects stories on Nath Pai from the archives and from people who knew him and who could talk about him, then stitches these stories together to produce a life, a chronology. This task is not easy. And while doing all of this, does not forget that there is a dimension of the personal there, which she wants to speak about while talking about the man who is so much larger than life. So for this conversation, it's also about the method of putting together these stories into narratives and articulations that happen through language. In many ways, artists and architects are in the business of putting together stories as well. So welcome, Aditi.
Thank
Aditi
you,
is
Prasad.
a journalist specializing in contemporary Maharashtra politics. She works at the India Today, and this is her first book. We'll know about Aditi as we continue this conversation further. Welcome again, Aditi.
Thank you, Prasad, for the opportunity. Just a small correction. I do not work with India Today any longer. I was until a few months ago, which I've
All
done for
right.
15 years.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry then. So Aditi is nevertheless, she's a journalist of Maharashtra politics. We have three other very special guests with us. People who knew Barrister Pai, knew about Barrister Pai, know about the movement, know about many more things than you know probably both of us. My pleasure to introduce Mr. Amrendra Dhaneshwar, Professor Narendra Dengle, and Professor
नमस्कार.
Neera Adarkar. Amrendra Dhaneshwar is a musician from the Gwalior Gharana and a senior music scholar. He was involved in several socialist movements and has also reviewed this book by Aditi. Professor Narendra Dengle is one of the most respected architects in India. His book with Ashish Ganju called The Discovery of India is a seminal work to understand Indian thought on space and form. He knew Barrister Pai and has heard him speak personally. And Professor Neera Adarkar is a founder of C. She's one of the trustees. She's the chairperson of the Society of Environment and Architecture, which runs C. Neera has had an activist life herself, but has had many stories and conversations and many thoughts and memories, and has been also very close to the socialist movement. So welcome again, Mr. Dhaneshwar, Neera, and Professor Dengle. So I'll ask questions, and we'll continue it as an informal conversation, and let's feel free to kind of barge in whenever one feels like. I'll start asking Aditi about her book, and let's see where it goes ahead from there. Aditi, uh, you met people, you collected oral narratives, visited different places and organizations, gathered personal and official documents and photographs. You were driven, you were investigative, you were persistent. You would like to elaborate the process. I want to before that show the book. The book is this. Uh, it's uh, it's called Nath Pai, Patriot, Visionary, and Man of the People by Aditi Pai. So so you want to talk about the process, the friendships and associations that you made on the way. uh, what were the gaps, how did you fill it up, because there are lots of anecdotes which kind of were put together, and your own ways of doing it. Aditi.
So, very honestly, Nath Pai is a name that I had always heard at home ever since I was a child. So, grandparents told us stories, parents, relatives, wherever we went for family gatherings, the extended family, everybody spoke about Nath Pai. Sometimes it was just pure affection, sometimes it was admiration, sometimes it was awe. And I always wondered who was Nath Pai that everybody admired so much. And as I went through school and college, I kept looking for him in, say, history books, but never found a mention. So somewhere I always wanted to know more about him, discover what Nath Pai was all about. And finally, about 3 years ago, I got down to actually doing some research on Nath Pai, and we had lots of written material in terms of newspaper articles, old photographs and letters, and I decided to begin my research from there. So using that, using written speeches that were documented, I also got his speeches from the Lok Sabha library. I tried to first build an outline of the man, which I did, and then I wanted to flesh him out, because through this I got a timeline, a chronological timeline of his efforts and his achievements. But I still couldn't understand the man. behind all these achievements. So, I started out with him being a freedom fighter, going on to become a socialist leader, and then a parliamentarian. And that's where the anecdotes came in. So I spoke to whoever I could finally find within our family, extended family, contacts that I made through and through references. There were old photographs that were framed, which also told the story of Nath Pai. So, we had this picture that I found of him in disguise with long hair and a long beard. And this was when he was a part of the underground movement as an 18-year-old in Belgaum. And that's where I met a few socialist leaders. I traveled to Belgaum, I traveled to Kokon, because Kokon was where he spent almost 14 years of his life representing that constituency. And it was a little difficult to find too many people, because I think I started this book research on this book a little too late. That entire generation was now either losing their memory, forgetting things, or most of the people weren't even alive. So a great resource for me was using the letters that his wife Crystal had written to her mother. So she was in India for 10 years, and every week she would write a letter to her parents in German talking about her life in India. So it was the personal and what was happening around them at that time. And that was a beautiful insight. These letters were in German, and their son, Dilip, is the one who helped translate most of these letters. So we couldn't do all 500, of course, but most of these letters. And through that, I got an understanding of what life was for them, at least between 61 and 71 while she was in India. So this helped me, create a picture, build a picture of this man who I was very intrigued by. Now, the thing about oral, most of it, other than the documented speeches, the personal stories came only through oral narratives. And what was interesting is that people remember instances, they remember the crux of what had happened at that time, but there's a lot of emotion that is attached to it. So sometimes I felt that this I got different versions of the same incident. Also, as we realize that the human mind is actually like a kaleidoscope. It creates these vivid images using a combination of different elements like facts, the circumstances, and the emotions attached to it. And as the years go by, the image shifts a little and it creates another beautiful picture, but which is slightly different from the original one. So these were the gaps that I had to fill. So to give you an example, it's a very small example actually. It was about where during the Quit India movement, Nath Pai was finally arrested. His colleagues from Belgaum, who are now in their 90s, told me that he was arrested from the Nesrikar home, whereas some of our extended family members who were in Belgaum at that time said that he was arrested from another house. And they both said it with so much conviction that it's difficult to dispute who is right in this. It doesn't really matter where he was arrested from, because these homes were probably just 100 meters away. But that is where I think the gaps came in, because you can't be sure that this is the absolute fact, that whether he was arrested from this home or the other. So these were the slight gaps, I think, that I had to fill. But what I did in that case was I went with what the majority said about a particular incident wherever there was a dispute. Then there was another instance where in 1964, apparently, Mr. Nehru and Lal Bahadur Shastri had invited Nath Pai and a few other socialists to join the Congress. The stories that the family recalls is that he was offered so and so cabinet berth, what Nath Pai said to them, but it couldn't be validated because there was nothing written. So I only went by what newspaper articles said, and I said there were murmurs of such an invitation. I couldn't really write with conviction that this is the exchange or this is the conversation that happened, because we are also referring to other people like Nehru and Shastri who are no longer there to validate or verify this information with. So I had to choose, wherever there was a dispute or there were differences in what people said, I had to choose what I wanted to say. So sometimes, in some cases, some memories or some instances may feel a little vague, but that is because I couldn't really verify those or have them validated. But through all of this, I discovered new places. I discovered Bilgao, I discovered Konkan, I discovered the various, the culture there, the way society is. So along with discovering or exploring Nath Pai, I also discovered the socio-political situation of that time,
Yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
the era, of the decades of the 40s, 50s, and the 60s. I of course made new friends in Konkan. So these were people, and it gave me a range of people who I could meet, right from his parliamentary colleagues to people who worked for him in his party in Konkan. So it was I think a very enriching experience.
Nice, nice, very nice. Thanks, Aditi. I want to construct the man actually, and I want to invite and I want to invite Professor Dengle in helping us kind of constructing this man. This man is kind of he's there in the parliament in its earlier years for 15 years, okay, almost. And when he dies, he doesn't have even 10,000 rupees in his bank account. He's kind of they don't have a house to live after he dies. The family. He's kind of he has one seat. His party has one seat in the parliament, but his voice is the voice of the opposition at that time. What is this man? Who is this? Who is this kind of personality? You want to kind of start with talking about him, Professor Dingley?
Yeah, thanks, Prasad. It's wonderful to know that Aditi has brought out this book, and very enigmatic personality, very charismatic personality of Nath Pai. And I've seen the way the socialists and his colleagues, in the constructive movement as well as in political movement, admiring Nath Pai, and full of admiration. My acquaintance with Nath Pai and his thought, his speeches was entirely due to my father, who also was a socialist and who became the joint secretary of All India PSP before the Janata Party was formed. And if you have to, I mean, the moment you talk about people like Nath Pai and those who represented socialist ideas in the parliament, they're backed by several people, in the constructive field. And my father, who was also underground and caught and put behind bars and so on, he was probably a little senior to Nath Pai, and uh, he left his studies of engineering in Pune and had joined the freedom movement. So he devoted his entire life to the constructive activity of Rashtra Seva Dal, whose he was heading Rashtra Seva Dal as his first Dala Pramukh in later when the constitution was reframed. So the first time that I got to hear Nath Pai, as far as I remember very well, was in 1965. It was in Dhule, where Rashtra Sevadar was celebrating probably the 25th anniversary. And it was a big sort of gathering. And my father was there. I attended all those sessions. And Nath Pai gave a wonderful speech there. And I remember, the photograph that is there on the cover of this book is exactly the same person, probably a little less hair on his head in those days, you know. So this is the picture that used to come in the press. Whenever Nath Pai spoke, the picture in the press was, I think Nandu also would say the same thing. This was the picture, in whether
Yes.
it is Marathi press. My father told me that Nath Pai was a very much sought after speaker for the Labour Party in UK during the elections, and when he was a student. So he was a very sort of comfortable with three languages at least. I don't know whether he spoke Hindi, but he was very comfortable
He
in
did
Kokon,
speak Hindi.
Marathi, and English. He spoke a little bit of Hindi, but I don't know how much really. At that time, the number of parliament members of socialist parties were handpicked, a few, including H.V. Kamath. And, H.V. Kamath and Nath Pai were about the same time. And, maybe H.V. Kamath came about a couple of times there, but Nath Pai continued to be there until 1970 when he passed away. I remember reading that news when I was in Delhi. I was a student well, I was working with Jasbir Sachdev, and I saw the news in his office, and I talked with Jasbir Sachdev and Rajinder Kumar, who was his partner, and both were full of admiration, And of course, I heard Natpi once again in 1969, and this was in Tilak Smarak Mandir, the old one, not this one, the old Tilak Smarak Mandir in Tilak Road, opposite, my own house was right on Tilak Road. So my grandfather's, maternal grandfather's house was there. And after this, his speech, which was crowded, and he was speaking on defense and foreign relations, you know. And I remember Sadanand Varde, who is like an uncle to me. All these people were very close to us. I mean, so Sadanand Varde talking to my father, he said, "Look, Nana," that's what my father was known, Nana Dengle. He said, "Nana, Nath speaks so well. I wish he had had a few notes with him, some points. You could have actually made even better presentation, because they press and questions about what kind of ammunition you require, what kind of defense equipment that you require. He was very comfortable. He had no notes with him at all. So it was wonderful listening to him.
He had
After that
Shakespeare.
speech, he came to my home, our home, and I think maybe tea or something. Sorry, Prasad?
No, no, he had Shakespeare, I said.
Sorry?
He had Shakespeare.
Yes, yes. That is, I don't know what you call in English, bendia. The terms from Shakespearean plays were used by Natpai and Professor G.P. Pradhan. Because, and I came to know about this through my uncle, who was Professor Pradhan's classmate, Professor A.K. Bhagwat. Some of you may have known his son, Charu Bhagwat. So Professor Bhagwat, who was a very dear uncle of mine, maternal, and he said, "Look, Professor G.P. Pradhan and Nathpai used to have Bhendia using strictly terms from Shakespearean plays." So, which was very, very sort of intriguing for me. And I had just begun reading Shakespeare, without probably understanding the nuances. But in those days, that was the kind of wonderful thing. One other thing, Aditi, somebody may have told you this legion, as you said, you will keep hearing these stories. I was told that during some very busy electioneering campaign, Natpai had to go in Belgaum on his bicycle. He was an MP, and he was riding his bicycle very fast. He broke the traffic signal, and went ahead. And the police sort of
Okay.
whistled after him. And he said, "I'm coming back." In Kokani, he said, don't you worry. I will come to the police chowki and report. Just now, don't stop me. I don't have time. The policeman did not know, whether he was Nathpai or what. And Nathpai, sure enough, reported back, at the police station. So this was the character, where you said that he didn't have, any bank balance, but you say Madhu Dandaute, my father, Anu Varde, all these people, were like that completely. There was in character, they were the same. You see, Shurubho Limaye, or N.G. Gore, S.M. Joshi, and these are family home names for me. I was brought up with these people. So I know, how much, and it was not necessarily that their wives or spouses, they were ladies also, and that they struggled or they cribbed about it. No, never. Nobody ever cribbed about it. So it's quite admirable for somebody like Krista to come here from Austria and adjust to this life, and without any money. We can go on this.
Thanks. There is a lot of Shakespeare, and that story I remember of the police, him kind of cutting through the signals in the book itself, and book has many more things actually. So and it's available online on Amazon also, no, Aditi?
Yes, it's on Amazon and Flipkart.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
there on Amazon and
I
Flipkart.
remember where Nathpai used to wear, white shirt. It was never tucked in, came out like bush coat, full sleeves, and white trousers, and immaculate, and very sort of passionate speaker, you know. um, he was a heart patient, and people had warned him that you please don't sort of overwork. But he didn't listen. I mean, body and this thing that probably did not matter. This phenomenal reality uh, uh, comes secondary to what your basic passion. And some of I think what we leave out of our lives is this passion, and you just sort of execute like a bureaucrat would do, or like doing a job. And this is what one learns from them. I think this is very important.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Mira, you want to come in here with the 1952 elections and the caste question. Uh, uh, Mira, are you there? Yeah.
I'm there. My internet is fluctuating a lot today, so I
Yeah.
put the video off.
Go ahead. You're fine.
Okay, I I don't have my book in front of me, but what I'm going to share with you is something which I remembered because Aditi, I haven't finished reading Aditi's book, but you mentioned about this 1952 elections and the context of class and
Yeah.
caste, and how Nath Pai was, kind of, he didn't expect this kind of, this kind of issues to come up. I'm talking about Central Bombay. The elections is the first parliamentary elections in Central Bombay, where the communist and the socialist actually came, against each other. And Nandu, you can correct me if I make any error. So actually, what happened was Congress had its own mill workers union called RMMS, Rashtriya Mill Mazdoor Sangh, which was formed later. I mean, Communist Union was from 1920s, whereas Congress Union was formed mainly to combat communists in, I think, in 46. And the socialists were part of the RMMS, like Shanti Patel and many others. Now, it so happened that they wanted to stand for elections, the socialist group within RMMS, internal elections, but SK Patil, who used to kind of manage. He was a manager. He was like a treasurer of Congress Party, and he had a gunda called Borkar Dada from Ghodabdev Prasad, and that was a Congress gunda. And and that's why he had a say in this, in this elections. This is not 52 elections, this is the prior, the earlier elections within the union, RMMS. And SK Patil refused the permission to the socialist people to stand for elections. They didn't agree with many of the methodologies which Congress used. So SK Patil said, no way, you cannot stand because you're part of Congress. And that's the time they opted out of Congress and started their own union called Mill Mazdoor Sangh. Then in the 52 elections, there was this Mill Mazdoor Sangh, there was GKU, Girni Kamgar Union of the Communist Party, and Scheduled Caste Federation of now this is a really a very sad part of our history, that again, one version, Aditi, I can fully understand this, this speculating about people about different versions. So in our book we decided to take all versions. So the version of the Communist Party was that we asked Ambedkar and Socialist Party to join hands together and fight this election against Congress. But they did not agree. And then somehow it became election between three, Congress on one hand and no, two, Congress on one hand and Ashok Mehta and Ambedkar. Something again very different than what the election today is, that in those days, there used to be two-member constituency, which means the one vote would go to a non-Dalit and one vote would go to a Dalit. So now it was Communist Party, Congress, and Socialist and Ambedkar's party together. So these are like three parties in the election. And that is when what Dange did, again, it was quite shameful. that he told his workers to scratch the vote which is meant for a non-Dalit, which means Ambedkar lost huge number of votes because the entire, entire following of the Communist Party, which was, I mean, Communist Union, which was so strong, didn't vote at all. For Ambedkar would have got so many votes. And in this kind of internal politics, finally, in fact, Socialist Party was almost wiped out in 1952. And of course, the Congress won. And then then there are some memories of Shanti Patel about Borkar Dada and how there were attacks and so on. But this was like caste and class both coming together, playing their role in these 52 elections. That's all.
Thanks, Nira. Thanks. I mean, uh, uh, it's the genetics of socialism, for example, for in India, has been quite unique actually. In fact, I think Parishad Pai was himself kind of struggling between nationalism and socialism in his own kind of work. I mean, Professor Dengle mentioned about his interest in defense and foreign policy, but at the same time, a regional world citizen, humanity. There's this kind of a uh, 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 you know how does one kind of put this persona who's dealing with this complicated, and this is the time when many nations are getting formed in the world, across the world. So we have to kind of define our own politics and identity, and put ourselves together. So I want to invite Mr. Dhaneshwar to kind of give us a sense of socialism, as well as you know Nath Pai's kind of role in
Yes,
shaping it for India.
yes. See, the socialist movement was a byproduct of freedom movement,
Yes.
and the Socialist Party was a part of the larger Congress Party. It was formed in 1934 by young, enthusiastic, dedicated socialists uh, who were very much a part of the freedom movement, but they did not like they did not subscribe to the communist party or the ideology of the communist party, which was subservient to the Soviet Union and to the foreign policy interest of the Soviet Union. So uh, they were more uh, uh, oriented towards nationalistic sentiments, and that is the reason they were inside the Nasik prison when they formed the party. And they were from different parts of India. Jayaprakash Narayan from Bihar, and Lohia from Calcutta, and Nath Pai was not there that time, but N.G. Ghose, A.S. Joshi, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, all different kinds of people. Yusuf
Narendra
Mehr
Dev,
Ali
Narendra Dev.
from Bombay, Minu Masani from Bombay. So they came together and formed this party. They were part of the Congress. Uh, Nehru was sympathetic to them, and he was encouraging them. And the Congress always was a kind of a hold-all party, and there were rightists inside the Congress. There were Hindu nationalists inside the Congress, like Lala Lajpat Rai and Madan Mohan Malviya, and of course there were people like Patel and Subhash Chandra Bose. Subhash Chandra Bose was sympathetic to the socialists. Later on, uh, I would uh, I would not go into details, but after Gandhi was always he was enamored of socialists and their spirit of dedication. But he said that I believe in non-violence, and I believe in trusteeship. I don't believe in confiscating property of the rich people, which you believe in. So they always had a free discussions with Gandhi. And in 1939, when this Second World War broke out, there were differences between whether to support the British government against the Nazis or whether to demand freedom and then, demand some kind of commitment from the government of Britain about granting freedom to India and then support the war effort. On that issue, there were, this went on for 2 years, and ultimately the British government refused to give any commitment. It was led by an imperialist like or colonialist like a Churchill. And then the 1942 movement, Gandhi gave a call for quit India, which was fully supported by the socialists, and the socialists were leaders of that movement. Nath by himself was one of the participants. You have seen in the book, Aditi has covered everything, how he was beaten up by the police and the kicks that he got on his chest with the shoes on, and that damaged his heart, gave him angina, which ultimately claimed his life. So, this is the socialists were not pro-Soviet. They were for distribution of wealth. They were for distribution of land, but they believed in democracy. And when the 1937-38 trials, Moscow trials began in Moscow, where Stalin, uh, his colleagues like Trotsky and other colleagues who were executed or they were sentenced to Gulag Archipelago, etc. All those uh, atrocities of the Stalin regime, they, the socialists definitely, the leaders who took uh, lead in condemning and m- some distance which they thought was necessary between the communist ideology and social democratic kind of thinking. The leaders who took initiative in that was Dr. Loya and Minu Masani. Later on, Minu Masani became a pro-capitalist, pro-Tata, etc. So that's a different story. So in 1948, the socialists felt suffocated inside the Congress, and they felt that Congress is not the right vehicle for realizing our dream of socialism in India. So they decided to leave the Congress party in 1948. There was a big conference in Nasik. And because of their active participation in the 1942 Quit India movement, they became national heroes, all of them, from Loya to Jayaprakash and everybody. Nath Pai was a local hero in Belgaum, or people like Madhuli Maye and all of them, Shirubhai Ulimaye, NG Gore, everybody, SM Joshi. So in from 1952, they were riding a wave. From 1942 to 1952, they were riding a big wave of popularity. But in 1952 elections, they fought independently against the Congress, and they lost miserably because Congress had a history, had a tradition, and the garima of Jawaharlal Nehru, etc., etc. So the socialist, there were more communist parliamentarians who got elected than the socialists in 1942. And the Communist Party had a very strange history from 48 to 52, because it was banned also for some time, because they wanted to engineer a revolution in India, kind of armed rebellion from Telangana. When they went to meet Stalin, and Stalin asked them which is the nearest sea route. So they said it is about 300 or 400 kilometers away. So Stalin laughed at them and they said, "You are fools. Then how can you, have insurrection in in Telangana?" So this is the story. I won't go too much in detail, but so after 52, uh, for 3-4 years, socialists were a big force, and they were a very vocal force always. And in 1955, there was in the first split in the Socialist Party, and that split was between Lohiites and non-Lohiites, because Lohia, the Socialist Party was a member of a coalition which was part of the Kerala, government of Kerala. And the government of Kerala opened fire on the workers. And that is what really upset Lohia. He was in a prison in UP, and from there he sent a telegram to the National Party saying, condemning the use of bullets to quell the riots of uh, workers. So that was, and then because it was, he acted on his own without consulting the executive, etc., all those nitty-gritty of arriving at decision, he was expelled. And that was the first flip. So from 55, 56 to 62, 63, there was Socialist Party and Praja Socialist Party. Praja Socialist Party was the party in which Nath Pai was a member, and he became a member of parliament in 1957 because he was supported by the Sanyukta Maharashtra Samiti. There was a big agitation for the formation of a linguistic state, not a bilingual state, but Marathi speaking people wanted their own state, which was a movement led by socialist leaders like S.M. Joshi and others. So Nath Pai got elected from there, and once he got elected from there, he made his mark as a member of parliament, very learned in his particular area of study and uh, area of interest. As you said, in defense matter, as Narendra said, defense matters and foreign policy. They were his special subjects, and he used to speak very eloquently in the Lok Sabha on these matters. The funny part is that the same 1957 election, another fellow, young fellow of the same age, about 2 years younger than Nath Pai, who got elected and who was a very eloquent speaker, but not in English, in Hindi. That was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And Nehru liked his speeches also. And once, when Khrushchev had come to India on a state visit, the Soviet leader, Nehru introduced Khrushchev and Vajpayee, and he said, "This is going to be, he is likely to be a future Prime Minister of India." Nehru told about Vajpayee. Then Khrushchev reacted. He said, then what is he doing here? Had he been in Russia, he would be in Siberia. So this is the kind of democratic spirit which the Nehruvian uh, era had. You know, Nehru admiring Nath Pai for his eloquence, for his brilliance, for his speeches, for his dedication, for his commitment to the cause. He's, as Aditi has written, he advised him to focus on the plight of the people who are really have-nots. You know, use the forum of Lok Sabha for highlighting the plight of the have-nots. This is a kind of advice given by the Prime Minister to a young member of the opposition, which is something very remarkable. And Nath Pai, from 1957 to 1971, 1970, because 71 he passed away, 70 the parliament was dissolved. But those 13 years, he was very vocal, very eloquent, and very effectively, along with other members. Not he was the mistake people make is that he was not only a very good parliamentarian. As I had told Aditi, and I have reviewed in that book, in my review also, Indrajit Gupta, Hiren Mukherjee from the Communist Party, A.K. Gopalan, and Limaye from Socialist Party, Dr. Lohia himself, Minu Masani, Acharya Kruplani, everybody was there. It was all big guns of the oppositions, and the government used to really be scared of, these people uh, being in the parliament. It was one of the best era of our post-independence politics. And Nath Pai, uh, one very important thing which I want to tell you, he was a real linguist because he also spoke in Hindi. I have heard his Hindi speeches also. And though his English speeches or Marathi speeches were excellent. I mean, something really which would it would make the listener speechless. That kind of oratory he had, but his Hindi was also good. And this is something a very unique quality. The only other linguist which I have come across in the socialist movement or in politics is George Fernandez. He could speak many languages with great fluency, and he had that kind of oratory which would, of course, ignite the people. Nath Pai would inspire. That was the kind of oratory which he had.
That's so nicely. That's so nicely put. Ignite, but more appropriately inspire people. Aditi, what does Nath Pai's world mean to you? What is his world actually? How do you kind of sketch this persona for yourself? In the book. I mean, um, he's a firm believer in democracy. He wants to kind of this is the time when democracy is kind of setting into the country. People don't even know what democracy is, and he's constantly explaining it to people, their role in democracy, their role in managing themselves and their resources. He's kind of at the same time you know proposing Konkan Railway, getting pushing the government to invest in the nuclear program, warning the government about China affairs, many things actually. He's kind of he has a sense of the public and the world in him. What is your sense of the man actually? You're mute, Aditi.
Sorry. So when I was thinking of a title for the book, I wanted a title that would encapsulate all that he stood for it, or at least some of the factors that he stood for. And I think that at heart, he was a revolutionary, both in thought and in action. He was absolutely fearless. And we can see that through the examples from his life. So when, as a 19-year-old, he decided to go and set an entire police station on fire, it required valor. When he was arrested and all the other young boys were arrested and were being beaten up by the police, by the British police, he turned around and he said, "We are not petty criminals. We are freedom fighters, and you shouldn't beat us up. You should treat us with respect." Now, someone who's being whipped by the police, a 19-year-old, for days on end, you need to have fearlessness and courage to be able to say that. So it was fearlessness. It was, he was a revolutionary. He was a patriot. So when you talk about him constantly hammering the government policies on China or Pakistan, it was only because he wanted India to be this, he wanted to reconstruct a young democracy like India and make it absolutely self reliant, a democracy that can forcefully assert its identity and policies at an international platform. That is what he wanted. And moreover, he was an staunch believer in democracy. He believed that in a democracy, it's the people who are the supreme authorities, the people who should be able to direct their representatives to do what they want. And he was a man of the people. So his personal interests never took priority over his interests or his concern for the country.
Yeah.
And I think, all the struggles that he saw all through his childhood shaped his thinking. So he was brought up by a single mother after his father died when Nath was just about 8 months old. He saw how his mother instilled values of honesty and integrity in all the children. So they were so poor, but the mother was extremely self reliant. She didn't take any kind of financial help from her family. In fact, all the 8 siblings were made to sit and pluck the nut from the cashew fruit. And this is what they did in summers to get some extra income. And the mother would sit there and monitor all those 8 young children, making sure that they didn't eat a single nut. It wouldn't have mattered. The trader would never get to know. But she said, you have to be that honest. So that is where integrity was instilled in them at a very young age. We saw that when he went to school. He was really weak in mathematics. But seeing his efforts, the headmaster, when there was a deputy, I think, regional education officer coming for a test, the headmaster, in fact, told the other classmates to show their slate with the answers to help Nathpai. But even as a 10-year-old, he said, failure is better than dishonest success. So, these are the things that shaped him. And this is what, reflected in his work, even as a public figure, in all the policies that he framed. And he was very sure that, the one thing that he always said is that We are only the trustees or the custodians of our land, of this country, and which we are going to leave behind for the future generations. So we have absolutely no right to squander away this land. So we have to protect our land. He wanted to protect the territory and sovereignty of the country. And of course, this belief in democratic values. And I think his interest in socialism was actually ignited when he spent time in England while studying. Worked very closely with Clement Attlee. He worked closely with the Labour Party. He saw how Britain at that time, between say 48 and 50, was becoming a welfare state, whether it was their national health insurance or an insurance scheme for the citizens. He wanted India to be a welfare state as well. He became the first non-European president of the International Union of Socialist Youth, which is known to take up humanitarian and democratic causes. And so when he traveled across Europe, he saw these new democracies being built. He traveled extensively to Israel. He was very impressed by how they were adopting socialism to build a welfare state. And he wanted India to do the same thing. So, and when he felt that the government wasn't, wherever he felt the government wasn't doing enough in that direction, he voiced his opposition all the time. As far as, so that is where I think the nationalist part of him comes in. There was no, Prasad, are you there?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, sorry, the frame just froze.
Yeah.
So, and you talk about his regional identity. Now, his regional identity wasn't really regional in the sense where he takes up the Belgaum issue. And he says that you need to integrate the Marathi majority areas into this new linguistically formed state called Maharashtra. It was only on the basis of injustice. He felt in a democracy, the people's wishes come foremost. And if the people wished to be a part of Maharashtra, they should. Because he even said that. He said for him, it wasn't a question of Kannada versus Marathi. He said it's just injustice being done to the people. Because if a certain formula was applied while forming the states of say, Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, why isn't the same formula being applied here? So even over there, it wasn't regional identity. It was only his belief in democratic values and what people want. Konkan, of course, was his area of focus, his priority, and he always wanted to educate the people. So he went back to them again and again. And the first time he went back after a very fruitful session of the Lok Sabha in 1957, he went back and told the people that have come here to present a report card to you. So he believed that a representative of the people should be accountable and answerable. And he also told people that if we want to keep our democracy alive and well, you should be asking us questions. So I think this was his view. This is what, these were the experiences that shaped him. And that's what Nath was.
Yeah, and a believer in democracy, where the opposition has to kind of have a very important and significant role, and even when the opportunity arose to kind of join the government, I mean even in whispers, he said to himself that it is the opposition which is more important in the democracy, and I will stand from here and speak from here. It's a trust in that system of oppositions, and probably that is the reason why he's constantly kind of opposing Nehruvian ideas of socialism, and also the politics, and also the kind of sensibilities of the time actually.
And it was always very principled opposition. So there was no personal or even party interest in that. He just believed that the opposition should take corrective measures. It should be a watchdog on the government policy, on the government, so that they frame policies. So in fact, while talking to even the people of Konkan, who at that time weren't very highly educated, there was illiteracy was quite high among the people. But even while talking to villagers, what he stressed was, he said the role of an MP is to any parliamentarian, especially of the opposition, is to keep a check on the government, point out the deficiencies, and frame policies that can eradicate poverty, unemployment, and also secure our land and our sovereignty. So he took this role of an opposition member very seriously.
There is a sorry.
May I add something here to what?
Yes, please.
Said and what?
Yes, please.
Yeah, interesting. Nandu narrated the whole the history of Socialist Party and what happened, etc. I think we have, in those days we had, I mean, socialists had very few MPs, and the difference between Congress and the so-called socialist in those days, public perception was very small. There was hardly any difference. To be called them as something with a separate identity. But why did they get out of it? Why did they get out of Congress? Because as Aditi said, the, the ability to be to enjoy being, or the ability to critique in the national interest, in the interest of the democratic socialism, not just call it national interest, because today it will be construed differently. So, uh, so you wanted to be able to critique it when you are within that party and you are unable to critique it. And this ability of the socialists went a little too far within themselves too, and which the means also started mattering even more, and then the party split. So that is one point. The other point that I wanted to say about uh, wanting to be able to connect with IUSY, the because you actually believed as socialists that the IUSY are your sort of brothers and sisters. So you could actually have some kind of if the communists had a kind of a family, this is probably the socialists who would help each other, democratic socialism. I mean, it sustained almost up to the German chancellor. What's his name? I forget. You probably know. Very respected sort of socialist chancellor, and they believed in sort of making that whole sort of cordon, and help each other ideologically, and to experiment different ways of achieving the means of critiquing, and the activism and parliamentary democracy both had to sort of tie up together. One thing that goes in favor of Nath and other such people is their comfort with literature, arts, activism, and politics. So you sort of combined all these three things, and you're comfortable with this. So they were not unesthetic. They were not sort of, they could use some building. As architects, I would say, in the context of current topic, current project that I'm working on, I visited number of things in Khandesh and Marathwada, and Christian Maharshis of Maharashtra have put up schools in forts, but completely misusing the building, I mean, to the extent that buildings are totally abused. And there's a complete disconnect between what you think is socially important and what is, so for that you could actually manipulate anything else, which is a disaster for our state, really.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
Nathpai probably was very much aware of this. And the equitability in social life and carrying everyone along with you, almost like the Mahayana Buddhists, the Avalokiteshvara, who refuses to sort of transcend. He says, I will not cross this into so-called moksha and leave everything, but I will go only when I can carry other people with me. So there is this concept, it's not so articulate. It was never, because as you must note that around that time, the so-called rationalism, the post-enlightenment, all that is bogging your mind, and you're completely divorced from your ancient literature, which also of was some value. So these are very interesting features of when you discuss anybody like Nath Pai and a socialist movement in sort of general. Thank you.
absolutely, absolutely. There's a question which is very interesting, which has come up, uh, uh, and I encourage other viewers to also write their questions in the question answer section. The question is from Divesh Bakchi. And his question is, and I think Mr. Dhaneshwar can take this up and throw some light, or Meera, or even Aditi or anybody. Uh, why is it that a generation that came
Yes.
after the glory of the generation of 1942 developed such antipathy to politics that the word politics has emerged a negative word and practice? What failed in the conversation between the generations? Why are the people who came afterwards became what they became subsequently?
One possibility or one reason is that the people like Nath or his colleagues, his colleagues, could never be in majority. They were always in minority. I would give you one example. I mean, we were talking about character. He, when he stood for his first election, as Aditi has mentioned in her book, he first said a few good things about the sitting Congress MP who was elected in 1952, and what good work he has done. And then he was contesting against him in 1957 against the same Congress member of parliament. It is unheard of in these days when you speak positively about the against whom you are contesting. So this kind of balanced approach to human beings is something which is everybody should have. Everybody, anybody in public life, or as everybody. I mean, many people know in the parliament. Uh, mm, our one of the senior ministers of Nehru cabinet and Shastri cabinet and even Indira cabinet. Uh, his daughter-in-law approached Nath Pai with startling, some startling information, and she wanted him to use the forum of the parliament
Yeah.
to kind of expose him. Nath Pai heard her with patience, with sympathy, but he said, "This is not the forum to expose very private things which uh, I mean pertain to his personality. This is not the right thing to do. I would request you not to press me on this point." Uh, when Jayaprakash Narayan, his wife Prabhavati died, she uh, she was a very good friend of Kamala Nehru, and Kamala Nehru used to write letters to her, and both of them were exchanging letters all their life. So Jayaprakash had a big collection of Kamala Nehru's letters, and they were very private in nature. I mean, about the kind of suffering that Kamala Nehru went through as a daughter-in-law of the Nehru family. So they were very private letters, and Jayaprakash could have misused them against Indira Gandhi or the Nehru family, but he was a gentleman, and he went to Indira Gandhi and handed over those letters to her, saying that these are private letters. I don't want to make them public. So this kind of decency which these people had, very few people in public life have. And lack, as I said, these people are in minority, the people with character, the people, principled people, because they are in such minority and because power becomes a real uh, glue and real, uh, to be pursued without any compunction, without any consideration to values. This is why the there is a kind of aversion which always is there towards politics, and that aversion
I think we lost you.
and today it is at the nadir. Absolute.
Yeah.
This is
we're unable to hear you, Mr. Aneshwar. I think what Mr. Daneshwar is saying is that the glorious were never there. They were very far and few, and ones who shone, ones who did shine, kind of, uh, remain shining for us forever. And it was the generations. Uh, uh, the glorious were always in the minority. That's what.
May I add something here?
Sure, Aditi. Yeah.
So, he was asking about why the future generations of politicians are not as glorious. I think that was the question, right? Why do we have so much dislike towards them? I think it's because the in the first 2 or 3 Lok Sabhas, the members that we had were all products of the freedom struggle to a large extent. They came from backgrounds of struggle, strife, and sacrifice. They were all united in the cause of getting freedom from the British. So they had that common cause of nation building, which subsequently has completely deteriorated. I don't think there was no politics, or there was very little politics of opportunism, I think, which is now predominant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, that is the reason why, after maybe the second, third, and fourth Lok Sabha, somewhere it lost its sheen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There is another question from Smita Gandhi asking about his ideas of economic development of South Konkan. Well, in your book itself, you write about his ideas of Kokon Railway, and how it will connect the whole. It will connect the entire of Kokon to Bombay, and the movement will kind of create. Uh, 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 Create those the momentum for economic growth and stuff like that. I want to kind of stay a little bit longer with the question of what does Nath Pai mean uh, uh, today, and kind of coming back to you, Aditi. you know you and it's also the question of how you wrote about him, as a and for people who do not know, Aditi Pai is the grand niece of Nath Pai. So you wrote also as a family member, you wrote as a political journalist, you wrote as a youth. Uh, what changed for you uh, after after going through this life, or after reconstructing this life? What happened? Did it kind of uh, uh, you know mean something for you a little bit more than uh, your regular practice?
So to briefly touch on what the question that you got from Smita Gandhi, apart from the Kokon Railway, Nathpai constitutes something called the Kokon Vikas Parishad, where he brought people from different political parties, different affiliations under one umbrella body. And the idea of that body was to engage with the people of Kokon and engage with experts to draw up a development plan. So that is something that was very dear to him. So he believed that Kokon needed roads, railway, of course, and Kokon Railway was a vision that he always held, and he really worked hard to at least get the survey sanctioned in his lifetime. Uh, but other than that, there was no telegraph, there were no proper postal facilities, there were no medical facilities, and he believed that you needed to bring all of that into Kokon if you wanted some kind of development. Talking about the different selves that came into play while writing this book, I think as a journalist or as a reporter, it was very exciting to delve into an era that I had not been familiar with, which is India or Maharashtra in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So that was a new learning for me. Sayukta Maharashtra is something that I had heard of course, but never known what exactly it entailed, what it was. So I understood a very different aspect of the social and political situation or the background of Maharashtra. So that was a learning for me. As far as writing as a family member was concerned, or somebody who was related to Nathpai, I think I didn't bring that in at all. I didn't want to bring myself into it because one is that I have never met him, I have never seen him, so I have no personal experience with him. And secondly, I wanted it to be as objective as possible. Though I did, I think the family aspect came in only through the memories of relatives. And that I've tried to bring in only to show what his personal, what his personality was beyond being a public figure. So while the public and the personal always merged for him, he was always there for the family. He kept in touch with the family through letters, through phone calls. He was conscious of what his nephews and nieces were doing. So that's what I realized as while writing as a family member, because everybody had stories about him, everybody had memories of him on a very different level. I think for the first time I got exposed to a lot more of Marathi literature, which honestly I wasn't exposed to. So, while reading about what Natpai had said, I did read a little about Mangesh Padgaonkar, B.B. Borkar's poems. Now, these are things that I wasn't aware of. So it was again a new learning for me of Maharashtrian or Marathi history, Marathi culture, and literature. And I think on a very, very personal level, it was just a discovery and exploration of my family, extended family, and forefathers. The struggles that they faced, where they came from. Even things like, which I found really hard to believe, that when Nathpai's eldest brother died. He died in 1961, and they didn't tell their mother about it until her death in 1970s. For 9 years, they hid this information. So these were interesting things that I learned about the family. There were new branches of the family who I hadn't heard of until now, who I discovered. So yeah, different aspects came into play while doing research for this book.
Yeah, nice, nice. Professor Dengley, you want
I
to
want
leave?
to add one or two things.
Yes,
Can
yes,
I?
yes,
I
sure.
want
But
to
Professor
leave.
Dengley wants to leave.
If
Hello.
you would
So,
excuse me. Huh? I
so
hope you would excuse me, please.
yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much for joining. Yeah,
Thanks very much. It was wonderful meeting old friends and also listening
Yes.
to
Yes.
Aditi and you.
Thank you, Professor Dingley, for
My
being a
pleasure.
part of this.
Thank you.
I
yeah,
want to add one or
I,
more,
yes, yes,
one
please.
or two
I
more
also have
points.
something.
Yes,
One point which I would like to add. I mean, Nath Pai, great parliamentarian, great democrat, no doubt about it. But I also feel that he was a bit naive in the Indian context because uh, he believed in the supremacy of the will of the people, which is embodied in the parliament. And that's why he brought in that amendment which said that it is parliament which is the supreme.
yeah,
There are three: executive, the executive, the courts, I mean the judiciary, and the parliament. Between the three, the parliament is supreme. That's what his belief was, and it was consistent with his belief, strong belief in democracy, and that's why he brought in that amendment. Uh, and then later on as a private member's bill, but that was misconceived in the Indian context because to uh, give all the powers to the parliament to do anything. And it came up in the context of Golaknath case, which was recently discussed again. To right of the parliament to amend the basic structure of the constitution. It is a very dangerous step in the sense the parliament, which is uh, with brute majority, the ruling party can do anything. And today we have this kind of, I mean, it was misused by Indira Gandhi in 1975. She imposed emergency. It was a dictatorship for more than 19 months, and she misused the parliament. From 1973 onwards, she was showing those authoritarian trends, and all the time she was quoting Nath Pai. I mean, it was very diplomatic of her to quote Nath Pai and then misuse the parliament majority for bringing in non anti-democratic provisions, anti-democracy provisions. And similarly, today we fear that the basic structure of the constitution, which is secular, it is in danger because this government will do anything with their two-thirds majority and convert it into a theocratic state. So Nath Pai's intentions were good, and he engaged with a person of the eminence of Nani Palkiwala,
Yes.
and kind of won the debate in the university convocation hall where Neera was present. Unfortunately, I wasn't present that time, but uh, that is engaging in a debate and winning a debate is one thing, but uh, you know, uh, democracy being throttled with the use of brute majority is another thing. So this is one thing. Another thing about Aditi's book, I want to say one thing. M.V. Kamath, all of you know M.V. Kamath, the senior journalist, about Ram Guha's book, India After Gandhi. It was launched in Bombay, where M.V. Kamath was the one of the speakers, and I also was one of the speakers. So M.V. Kamath said, I envy Ram Guha. I should have written that book. So about Aditi's book also, I can say, I envy her. I should have written this book, but she has written book, and I must congratulate her.
That's so nice. That's so nice. There is Aditi, you want to respond to this because there is a chapter in the book on the parliament versus the judiciary, the supremacy of parliament versus the judiciary. Uh,
Yes, as Mr. Dhaneshwar said, Nathpai to an extent was very naive in believing that all power to amend the constitution or to decide the future of the people or the country should rest with the parliament. And that is what Mr. Nani Palkhiwala had pointed out to him and said that today we have members like you in parliament, so we are in safe hands. But I'm reading from the book, and he says 20 years later, who knows who will be working with these limits, what kind of people, how elected, and with what background and culture. We are providing for the unfolded future. If somebody asks me today, can you trust your representatives today? I would say yes. But if he asks me, can you trust the representatives who come 15 years later? My answer would be, I do not know. People like the honorable members here today are not going to be here for all time. You don't have a Nath Pai every day. That's what Nani Palkhiwala had said. And so, yes, he was probably very naive in believing that all power should rest with the parliament, which I'm sure a lot of people would agree shouldn't. Because even today we see that whenever we are upset as the common people, we keep going to the courts to find recourse from what the government decides. So all powers to amend the constitution, because what Nani Palkhiwala believed is the constitution is the framework for running our democracy, and that shouldn't be amended by a party which just has two-thirds of a majority, because they may be in power today, somebody else will be in power 5 years later, and they'll amend the constitution again.
I think for Barisha Pai, it was more of a philosophical question. I mean,
Yes,
if
it was.
yeah, if in fact, I mean,
I agree with you.
I think he wasn't unaware that there will be misuse. You know, I do not think, because his scholarship and his kind of width of understanding was much wider. I think it was more of a philosophical question in the sense that when people were to decide about themselves and their, and for him parliament meant the people, and of course the whole question of majoritarianism was not resolved in his in completely. So it was, I think he was also struggling it philosophically, uh, and looking at it at a greater arc, uh, you know uh, the model of democracy and
Yes.
stuff like that. I think
Yes.
one can speak about it like that also. There is a question, Aditi, from
Yes.
Ashwin Gupta, and this is an interesting question also. He asks, what does it mean to record a person's life as a public figure to Aditi? How does it? How does this personality therefore nuance the meta narratives of history? Also, what does the idea of truth get articulated for Aditi? What does the idea, when does the idea of truth get articulated for Aditi? Since she defined a truth for a person's life. I mean, this there are two questions hidden in it. One is the whole question of the personal, and 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 you bring at many moments in the book you bring the personal in, his family. The book opens with his death, as a very personal moment for the family. uh, uh, but then there is a person who spends very little time with his family also. He's kind of, he's always away, he's always traveling and stuff like that. So there is a question of the personal in this. And the second question is, I think Ashwin Gupta is asking about, for you, as to when you collect stories and put them together, the truth, because you're also listening to stories and writing, and stories, maybe interpretations may have different layers of truth in them. So how do you resolve that question of truth? And Neera was kind of, hinting, there are so many versions of the same thing, and all versions appear to be true and stuff like that. So there are two questions about the question of the personal and the question of the truth.
To answer the first question of the personal, I feel that through whatever I understood about Nath Pai, the personal and the public always merged. So the country was his larger family. Personal interest never took precedence over the interests of the public. He thought of the people as, his family. So when he was as a teenager, when he was in jail, and his mother went to him and said, "I'm really upset, and stop these anti-British activities," he said, "Don't cry. Like you, I have thousands of other mothers in this country who I need to fight for." So even at that young age, I think he spoke about the larger country and the larger nation. Uh, Later on, 3 years before his death, he had written a letter to a party colleague in which he says, "I can feel that death is near. And I'm worried about my mother, my motherland, my wife, and my children." So even in that moment where he felt that death was round the corner, he feared for both his mother and his motherland. So the motherland, the public always came into the personal sphere all the time. And the sense I get is that these things merged and the personal never took precedence, is because somewhere I get a sense that he was always mindful, or he was always aware of his impending mortality. He felt that he had very little time and he had so much to do, which is trying to achieve whatever he could. So there were different issues that he wanted to take up, different things that he wanted to do. That's where I think the person came in. As far as the not spending time with his family, I think maybe the time may have been less. But when I speak to other relatives or even his sons, they say that whatever little time he spent with the family was very good quality time. It was, mindful attention that he gave the family. He was aware of what his children were doing, what they were studying. There was in fact, Mr. Dhaneshwar was telling me the other day that he had heard someone tell him that that Nathpai's older son was about 10 when he died. But even when he was younger, Nathpai used to read out from the Jnaneshwari to him because he wanted his children to learn that. Of course, when I checked this, when I asked Anand about it, he says he has no recollection of that. But then he was really young. So, yeah, he may not have had time, but he spent quality time with the family. And there was no concept of personal, in the sense he didn't care about owning a house, gathering or accumulating any property. Like you mentioned earlier on, that his wife, he had left behind just about 10 or 15,000 for his wife and his sons when he died. And it's not like he was not aware that he needs to make money for them, but never crossed his mind. So and even when she found 10,000 in the cupboard, when she was clearing out the cupboard, she went and gave it to the party. And she said, "This must be for the elections. So use it for the elections," because the 71 elections were coming up. So he didn't really want to leave behind or create a material legacy. I've mentioned this instance in the book as well, when Lal Bahadur Shastri died and Nathpai and Crystal visited his widow. He witnessed a conversation between some Congress members and Mrs. Shastri, where they were asking her to contest the by-elections. And she said no. And she said that that's something that Mrs. Shastri would never have liked. And while leaving the house, he turned around and told Crystal that if ever you were to find yourself in this place, just remember what Lalita Devi has said, you shouldn't fill in for me. So he didn't want to create a material legacy. He didn't want the personal to ever take precedence. The second question that he had was, could you please
Yeah,
tell me once again?
the truth about what is true when in stories, in personal narratives.
I remember, one of my uncles had once told me that his history professor had said that history most of the time is only very intelligent speculation. So history is always written only from, the person's perspective. So here, unless you're documenting facts in terms of what has happened in public and you have the dates written, everything is eventually just a narration of what people tell you. So as far as facts related to government policies, um, his speeches, what happened in the Lok Sabha are concerned, I have relied only on written documents, on documented speeches. As far as the personal stories go, I have tried to validate them from as many sources within the family, outside the family, within his colleagues and peers. And that is what I have. But yeah, that is a challenge when you're working with oral narratives.
Mr. Daneshwar has to leave. You have any last points,
Yes.
Mr. Daneshwar?
I mean, this is the point which I've already made all my points, and it's a great thing to. I had personally met Nath Pai, I have personally heard him, and he has been one of the inspirational figures in my life and in the life of many people whom I know. And she has done a great service to the not just to the Pai family or to Nath Pai, but to the entire readers of English language by writing this book about a great man, a dedicated patriot, a great parliamentarian, and a socialist who had the welfare of the people to his heart, but who is largely forgotten by the people of his country. So it's a great service. I congratulate Aditi for having done this.
Thank you. And Mr. Dhaneshwar, in fact, has been really instrumental in helping me understand what socialism was, what Nathpai was all about, and the other socialists of the time. So throughout this journey, I first met him about, I think, 4 years ago. And I remember I had drawn a chart while sitting with him to understand the origins of the Socialist Party, how it split, and all of that. So he's been extremely helpful, and I've learned about socialism from him. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks. Meera, your book is also about personal lives, no? You want to add something to the question of the personal?
No, not personal, but okay. The what I'm going to tell you, the background is this: that Socialist Party had its great time between say 48 to 52, and because it was not a cadre-based party like say Communist Party or Jan Sangh or BJP. These are cadre-based parties. So they are, because Socialist Party is known more for its leader.
Meera, you're breaking.
Think about this quality of socialist leaders. He said that all your socialist leaders are these pink Pune socialists. What he meant was, pink Pune socialist means all upper caste, many Kokanasta Brahmins, very fair, and and they have no cadre, But that, oh, you're pink socialist. So he would always tell me, you're Pune pink socialist. So because NG Gore, SM Joshi, all very good looking, upper middle class, upper caste leaders. So that's all.
Yeah. So, so Ashwin kind of further clarifies that what does it mean uh, in his question, to write a history through one person's life. Uh, uh, it gives you a slice, and I think uh, that's uh, uh, that's what biographies are about. It gives you a slice, of that particular moment uh, in the life of Earth, actually. Uh, So what is next, Aditi? How do you see the next work or a project, or what is the next is it going to be fiction, non-fiction, semi-fiction, biography? What happens next to Aditi Pai's writing?
It has, I have definitely enjoyed the process of you tying up, oral history and memories to address or to understand a particular historic event. Like I said, in this case it was the upheavals or the political changes that we saw between the 40s and the 60s. So that is something I definitely would want to explore, a similar format wherein explore some slice of history through the eyes of a person, through a very personal viewpoint. But before that, we're working on the Marathi translation of this book, because I wanted to write a book in English to reach out to an English reading audience, and because that's the language I can write in. But to take it to more people, especially the people uh, of Kokon, or generally the people of Maharashtra who are more comfortable reading in Marathi. We are having the book translated into Marathi, which will release on the 18th of January, which is Nathpai's 50th death anniversary. Next year, we also begin his birth centenary. It marks his birth centenary. So looking at you know, using more, documenting more aspects of his life, because he was such a multi-dimensional personality. So one thing I definitely want to do is that the wealth of letters that his wife had written and preserved. We want to see. I want to see if some of them at least can be, or most of them can be translated from German into English, and do a compilation of that. Another period of history that really interested me was the entire Sayukta Maharashtra movement. So I definitely want to study a little more about that, because it's very fascinating to see how people got together just for this one idea of building a linguistically reorganized state. And again, I've got exposed to the arts culture, the folk culture of Kokon, which again I think has not been documented enough. So maybe that is something I would like to explore. So there are these various ideas, nothing concrete at the moment other than the Marathi book.
There is one last question from Shaina Anand, and she says that I was looking forward to understanding more about socialist and socialism in those years, and not just rich factoids or the splits, pharaohs, and new formations. We seem to have discussed democracy, nationalism, but not socialism. Also, shows socialism in India often gets conflated with welfareism, but many of these people had quite developed ideas of what socialism meant for India. Looking forward to the book and hope it is these. It has these details. Actually, I mean, when I was reading the book, also Aditi, the I think the I think one couldn't separate the questions of socialism from that of nationalism and democracy during the time, actually, because we are all struggling to put that together. And I think that's something which, and the book itself kind of struggles to kind of put that together along with the whole dynamic of the biography, where the life is kind of lived also.
So
uh,
I think the socialism of that time, from my not so extensive understanding, very limited understanding, is that what the socialists wanted is to reconstruct a nation which is egalitarian. So there are equal opportunities for all. They wanted, some of the things that they always wanted was a need-based minimum wage program. They wanted a ceiling on land holdings, because they felt that there should be equal or at least equitable distribution of resources. They wanted a self-sufficient country. As far as the foreign policy goes, they wanted non-alignment with the power blocs and full cooperation with the neutral economies. They were opposed to imperialism and to racial movements. They wanted close relations with Israel because it was a socialist state. Then they wanted self-sufficiency even in conventional and nuclear arms, because they believed that we have to protect and even recover the territory that was lost to China and to Pakistan. They wanted to weed out corruption. They wanted a devolution of power. So they said that you have to decentralize power for more effective, decentralized administration, in fact. So I think this was my understanding of what the socialist leaders wanted. In the course of doing research, when I spoke to several people of that time, someone told me that even within the socialists, there was some who were more extremist and some who were more moderate. So Nath Pai, I think, fit into that moderate mold to a large extent. Because in fact, Dr. Karan Singh told me that there were certain socialists in parliament who abhorred him only because he came from a royal family. And he said, but Nath Pai was never like that. He said he understood that, people come from different backgrounds. All he wanted was a welfare state and an egalitarian society. So I think I have tried to bring that into the story of Nath Pai. So I hope it comes through.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Great, great. Thanks, Aditi. There are no more questions, and I believe uh, uh, I think I'll show the book again. The book looks like this. It has Nath Pai on its cover. It's available in on Amazon. And thanks, Neera, and thanks, Aditi. Thanks for uh, for this session, and kind of bringing these stories and bringing the difficulties and bringing the personal, the conceptual, the public, and it is a task to write biographies. It's not easy, and it's a great book, I must say. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much, Prasad, for this opportunity and for giving me this platform to talk about the book.
Thanks, Neera.
And he was such a charming person. Nobody spoke of his charm. As a school-going teenager, my God. And he had a wonderful feminine quality in him. I can never forget. Even his picture in the book speaks so much about that charm. That's all. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Aditi. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
We can close. Dipti, we can close.
Yeah.
Uh,